jealous coworker sent my husband a video of me with my boss. He showed me no mercy.
Too loose with my boss at a party and didn't notice my coworker videotaping me. Have you ever been in a situation where you were videotaped by a coworker at a party before? Well, I was. It's a scenario I want to erase from my memory. The aftermath of that has cost me my marriage, career, and all the things I have worked for over the years. I regret it and take accountability for everything. I wish I could turn back the hands of time to right all the wrongs and also erase that memory. But I guess it's not possible. My husband has cut all ties with me and sworn never to set his eyes on me again. He doesn't deserve it. The way I cheated on him is something that no man in his right senses would forgive his wife for. His revenge was brutal and he showed no mercy. I guessed I deserved every bit of it. I have learnt my lessons. My name is Linda and I am 25 years old. The name of my ex-husband is Leonard and he is 28 years old. My husband and I have been together for 6 years, but recently we went our separate ways. We both had a son together. His name is Emmy. He is 4 years old. I feel ashamed right now and can't even go out like I used to do because I did the unspeakable. To think that I have a 4-year-old kid that looks up to me and still disgraced myself is something I can't forgive myself for. Apparently, my husband, Ray, watched a video of me cheating on him with my boss at our annual get-together organized by my boss. I didn't know what I was thinking. I had so much to drink and eventually got lost with him and made out with him. Maybe I shouldn't have drank too much or even agreed to go to the party in the first place. I should have just declined, right? But then it was an armless get-together that people go to. It was organized for all the staff to marry after a long day at work. I think I over-enjoyed myself and got so carried away that I forgot that I was married. Did I drink too much that day? Yes, I did. In fact, more than anyone else in the hall. I didn't want my husband to know about my infidelity in the manner he did. I could have let him know about it eventually. Not on the phone. At least, not through a video. Leonard looked at me in utmost disgust and shook his head in disbelief when he saw the video. So, guys, my boss and I were very close to each other. We often hung out together outside work, but it was based on mutual friendship. We never had the intention of going extra with the friendship. Well, at least to my own end, it was like that. I didn't know what my boss's intentions were. My boss's name is Raymond. He is 29 years old. I have been working with my boss for 3 years now. Raymond is the CEO of the company I worked at. It is a shareholding company. There were several occasions where Raymond stole glances at me. He is the playboy type that likes having fun and never takes things seriously. After work, Raymond offered to take me out for dinner, and sometimes we had breakfast and lunch together. I wasn't expecting anything from the dates and the times we hung out together. We were both adults, and I set the boundaries between us. Raymond was also aware of my marital status, but he kept on leading me on. I don't blame him for that night because it was a temptation I should have resisted, but I gave in to it. I woke up one morning as usual, ready to go to work. I got up from bed and made breakfast for Emmy and my husband Ray. We had breakfast together and left the house. The school bus came and picked Emmy. He was at elementary school at that time. My husband also left for his workplace, and so I did. I got to work and found a note on my desk. At first, I didn't pay attention to it because we had a meeting that all the staff had to attend. And so I dropped my bag and went straight to the boardroom. The meeting lasted till noon, and all staff went back to their respective offices. I got to my office and saw the piece of note. At that time, I got curious to know the content of it, and also know who had sent it. I opened it and saw what was written down. After reading through it, I already knew who it was. Of course, it was from Raymond. He was asking if we could go see a movie together. Then I remembered why he kept looking at me during the meeting. I read it and quickly tore the piece of paper and threw it in the waste bin that was close to me. I didn't want to be seen going out with Raymond because I didn't want the other staff to make side comments, and so I was careful. I got up and went to meet Raymond and told him I wasn't sure if I would go out with him at that time because I didn't want my husband to suspect or misunderstood our friendship. And so I told Raymond I wasn't going. He was persistent and said he just wanted to hang out with me and nothing else. At that time, I didn't understand why he liked hanging with me. I tried making up excuses, but he was persistent and told me he would be waiting for me. Raymond sent me the address before we closed from work that day. I went home and thought about how to sneak out of the house. I didn't know what to tell Ray, my husband. Of course, I couldn't say my boss wanted to see a movie with me then. Leonard would think there was more to it than just hanging out. I got home and was uneasy. I cracked my head to see if I could come up with a better idea of what to say to him. Then the thought of calling Rita, one of my colleagues, came to my mind. Rita and I got to know ourselves through work. We started off as coworkers and eventually got close together. I called Rita and told her about it, and she offered to help me come up with a plan. The plan was for her to come over to my place and did like we wanted to go to a book club. I waited for Rita for a few hours before she showed up at my house. Our plan worked, and so I went out with Raymond. Rita was the only one that knew about it, and she promised not to let anyone know. I snuck out of the house and went to see a movie with my boss, Raymond. When I got there, Raymond complimented my dressing and reminded me how beautiful I was then. I felt a little bit awkward and at the same time loved all the praises he showered on me. The night went fine and we had a great time. The movie lasted for 2 hours. Raymond and I got outside and I told him I needed to leave immediately because it was already late at that time. But he insisted I stay a little longer and have ice cream, which we did. The night was pleasant and I felt happy. At that moment, I wished Leonard could have me treated like the way Raymond did. My husband and I were so busy with work that we hardly had time for each other. But we still made out time for our son. So guys, Raymond got us ice cream and we had it together. After a few minutes later, I told him I needed to go, and at that time, I made up my mind to leave, even if he had insisted. Well, he didn't, but told me he would let me go if only I had kissed him. Of course, I refused bluntly and told him I wasn't going to do it. Raymond had an expression of shock and confusion on his face. I got hold of myself, and then I got into my car and drove off. I got home that night and met my husband and son already in bed. I quickly freshened up and went and joined Leonard on the bed. Honestly, guys, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I had mixed feelings about the night. I was happy that I had fun and at the same time thought about what Raymond said. At that time, I didn't want to have any type of relationship aside from work with Raymond, but he kept coming closer. After a few hours, I finally fell asleep and retired for the night. The next day, I woke up from bed and did my morning routine before going to work as usual. I couldn't get over the previous night. I kept thinking about it for some reason. I was so deep in my thoughts that I didn't notice when Leonard was talking to him. I got myself back when he tapped on my shoulder twice. I came back to myself and asked him what he was saying. Leonard looked at me and asked if everything was okay. At that point, I didn't know what and started stuttering. Eventually, I managed and told him that I was carried away with something and apologized. He shook his head and repeated what he was saying. Apparently, Leonard wanted to know how my book club went the previous night, because he had fallen asleep when I arrived. I couldn't look at him before I responded because I never went to any book club. I lied. Leonard nodded and didn't suspect anything. He sat down and ate his breakfast, and after a few minutes, he left for work with our son, Emmy. The school bus broke down that day, and Leonard had to take him to school. As soon as they left, I got dressed and headed out to work. I was nervous and at the same time scared, because I thought maybe my boss would be upset after turning him down the previous night. At that point, I planned on avoiding Raymond throughout that day. I got to my office and I saw a bunch of flowers waiting for me on my desk. I looked at the card and discovered it was from Raymond. My mind skipped a bit, but then, for a weird reason, it brightened my day. Not long after, I received a call from Raymond. He called to know if I had received the flowers he had sent. Apparently, he hadn't gotten to work at that time. He was caught up with something that he needed to stay back. I thanked him and told him that I liked. We talked for a while and he made me laugh throughout our conversation. I had to end the call because I was getting another call from my husband. I spoke to my husband not feeling guilty because I thought what was going on between me and Raymond was not that important, and there was no need for me to worry him over it. I got off the phone with my husband and did all the work that was on my table. The flowers were beautiful. I was very happy at that time because no one had given me flowers in such a long time. I also called Rita and told her about everything that had happened the previous night. She teased me about it and made funny jokes throughout our conversation. We talked for a few minutes before we were called for an emergency meeting that day. We got to the boardroom and everyone was seated to hear why the meeting was called. All the staff were present except the boss, Raymond. Everyone had started whispering why he summoned us. We waited for a while before he joined us. Raymond walked in looking all handsome. I watched him walking smartly till he sat down. He was very good looking and at the same time knew how to treat a woman with love. Before anyone would notice my absenteeism, I quickly recomposed myself. Apparently, Raymond called all his staff to have a nice hangout together. It was an annual get-together that is usually organized every year, and all staff were expected to be in attendance. It was more like an end-of-the-year party, but was usually celebrated 2 months before Christmas. All the staff were excited because they were going to have fun. I was also excited and looked forward to it. The get-together was to happen during the weekend. The meeting came to an end, and we all returned back to work that day. Those that were in the planning committee were assigned to organize the events and also put the necessary things together. It was an all-white party, and all the staff were expected to be on white. White is one of Raymond's favorite colors, and we always dressed in white anytime we had any small gatherings. Raymond gave all of us the day off that day so we could have time to prepare for the day party. We only had 1 day to the event, and so we needed time to put things together. I got home that day feeling tired and exhausted. George. Even though we didn't spend much time at work, it was exhausting for me. I got home that day, rested a bit, and headed to make lunch for my husband and Emmy. After I was done, I had my meal and went upstairs to have a quick nap. A few hours later, I was woken up by Emmy's noise. Anytime he sees my car parked outside, he knows that I'm around. He climbed upstairs to meet me. I never joked with my son. He was my bundle of joy and always knew how to make me happy anytime I'm sad. I met Emmy and played a little before I had him changed into his housewares. I fed him his lunch and he slept off afterwards. Soon after, my husband came back from work. Just like any other day, he was looking so tired. He sure did have a long day at work that day. He came down after a few minutes and had his lunch. When it was evening time, we played some games with Emmy and also had dinner together. A couple of minutes later, we went to bed and rested for that day. 2 days later, it was the day of the party. I woke up that morning and told my husband about the party. He wasn't surprised because he knew it was an annual get-together my company always organized. And so he gave me the go-ahead. After we talked that morning, he told me he was going to hang out with his friend Matthew and also took Emmy along. As soon as they left, I made arrangements for what to wear, the type of bag and shoe that would match the white dress to the event. After a while, I finally came to a conclusion on what to wear. After that, I went downstairs, did some cleaning and washing, and also made something for my husband and Emmy to eat when they got back. During that period, I called Rita so we could go together. She agreed and came down. The party was scheduled to start by 8 p.m. and end at 11 p.m. Rita eventually got to my house at exactly 7:30 p.m. I got out of the house and we drove to the venue. We got out of the car and headed to the entrance. The decorations from outside were elegant, and not just outside, but inside as well decorated. I commended those that did it. They really outdid themselves. On getting inside, I saw my boss, Raymond, and one of the staff conversing at a corner of the hall. Immediately he saw us. He walked towards our side. We said hi to him, and Rita asked to be excused. Raymond and I talked about a few things and also flirted with me. At exactly 8 p.m., Raymond called the attention of everyone in the hall. He talked about a few things and asked us to make a toast for ourselves. Everyone clicked glasses and we had wine. So guys, the party was moving slowly and the atmosphere was nice. I had a lot to drink and also ate a few snacks. Soon after, the music was on and we all danced together. I had a few dances with my colleagues and also with Raymond. Indeed, I had a great time. Just when Raymond and I were dancing, I asked him to come over to a corner because I wanted to show something to him. He got curious and then followed me. At that point, I didn't know what I was thinking about. I can't say I was intoxicated, but I knew what I was doing. Raymond followed me, and just when I could say anything, he grabbed me and kissed me. Yes, guys, he did. We were in that state for like 30 minutes before I pulled out and left his place. At that time, I gained my senses and went home before the party was over. I couldn't wait nor looked for her. I immediately called a cab and went home. Raymond kept calling and texting me on my way home, but I refused to pick nor returned any of those messages. I got home and freshened up and went straight to bed. 2 days later, I decided not to go to work because I didn't want to face Raymond after what had happened between us. I tried reaching out to Rita, but it was going. After trying it for some time, I stopped trying. I was worried and thought about what happened to her lines. It was a Monday morning, and of course, Raymond and Emmy had left home. I was the only one left at home that day. Later that afternoon, my husband came back from work looking so angry and upset. I didn't know what was wrong with him at that time. I was so shocked because I had never seen him that angry before ever since we knew each other, or since when we got married. Before I could understand what was going on, I felt a heavy sound across my face. Leonard gave me a hard slap. I didn't know when hot tears were running down my eyes. At that moment, I managed to ask why he slapped me, and then, guys, Leonard brought out his phone and showed me a video. I looked at it and saw that the video was me and Raymond making out at a corner of the hall. I was surprised and shocked at the same time. I didn't know what to do or tell Leonard. My husband shouted at me and even punched the wall. Leonard punched it in such a way that it left a hole on the wall. I got so scared and ran away from his side. Leonard was very upset and angry. To think that it was my boss that I cheated on him with, Leonard was very angry. My husband pushed me out of the house that day and told me never to come back to his house. Leonard also threw my things out and had the gatekeeper thrown me out of the compound. At that moment, I didn't have anywhere to go. I was stranded and helpless. I couldn't go to my parents because they lived far away from the city my husband and I were in. I called Raymond and explained everything to him, but he said he was upset with me for not picking up his calls and also drew a conclusion to fire me for not deciding to take a day off, even when work had resumed. He blocked my lines and also sent me the sack letter. Everything I had worked for was crashing right in front of me. I cried bitterly for days. Raymond had cut all ties with me and Leonard had sent out from his house. I thought of who I could go stay with for a while. Just then, I remembered an old-time schoolmate and headed to her house. Her name is Joy. Update. So guys, I stayed with Joy for some time before I finally moved. I didn't want to cause any inconveniences for her. My husband filed for a divorce immediately and had it sent to me a few weeks ago. I took time to reminisce on all that had happened in the past few weeks before signing the divorce papers. Leonard has also filed for a restraining order and kept Emmy away from me. But one thing I can't take is for Emmy to address someone else as mom. No, I won't take it and will never allow it. I'm going to fight for the custody of my son with every penny, even if I will go broke after that. After thorough investigations, I got to know the person that videotaped the scene. It happened to be one of my colleagues at work. I was so shocked and surprised and couldn't believe it. Guess who, guys? It was Rita. Yes, guys, Rita was the one that videotaped me at the party. Apparently, I called this person a friend. Well, I thought we were. I never thought she could do such a thing to me. I got to know about it a few days after my husband divorced me. When I got to know that she was the one behind it, I paid her a visit. At first, she wanted to deny it, but then later admitted when she knew I didn't come to play. Rita was shocked that I could get so upset like I did. She apologized for doing what she did and said it was a big mistake. Of course, I didn't buy the cock and bull story, and I sure gave her an angry piece of my mind. Apparently, Rita had always been daydreaming about Ray. She admired him in any opportunity she got. I thought maybe it was a joke, but never knew she had him in mind. I was foolish enough to fall right into her trap. I also got to know a few days ago that Leonard and Rita are now dating and soon to be a couple. I don't think I would be able to get this off my mind. I practically used my hands to destroy all the things I have worked for. And on top of that, a lady whom I called my friend was going to take over everything. I never thought someone who claimed to be my friend could betray me like that. To even think that she helped snuck out of the house on several occasions was something I can't really comprehend. I was indeed foolish to fall for it. Karma got me hard on these guys. I reported Rita, and after much investigation, all evidence pointed that she was guilty, and so Raymond fired her. At least let her face the consequences of her actions. Let her feel the heat of looking for a job for some time. Leonard can have Rita and marry her, but Rita can never have my child. I regret everything and I'm ready to face whatever revenge, but not with my son. I have learnt my lessons, and I guessed I have learnt it the hard way. My husband started sleeping with our neighbor because he found out about my affair. Hello, Reddit. I am a newcomer here. I've always heard of this app, but I've never really used it. This is my first time posting here, and I only created an account a few weeks ago. My friend recommended it as she thought my story would be a good one to share, as people might learn a lesson from it. So here goes. I cheated on my husband, and so he cheated back with our neighbor. And not only that, but I am also probably going to lose everything in the divorce. Now I know you might be saying, "Oh, you deserve it," and stuff like that. But to be honest, I did not come here to be shamed. I know what I did was wrong, and I have come to terms with it a long time ago. I do not need anybody reminding me of my wrongs and of what I have done. I know I was wrong, and I know that I am probably going to suffer over it for the rest of my life, so please do not come here saying that. I am just going to share my story so somebody might actually learn a lesson from it. My name is Serena, and I am a 29-year-old woman. I am married to Stanley, a 30-year-old man, and we have been married for 5 years. Or rather, I should say we were married for 5 years, as we are getting a divorce now. Stanley and I live in the United States, and we don't have any kids. We were planning on having some when we were in our mid-30s. Stanley and I met in college. I remember stepping into the packed lecture hall on the first day of my sophomore year at university. My heart was racing with excitement and nerves. I asked if I could seat there, and he accepted. As I settled into the seat, we exchanged introductions. His name was Stanley, studying economics like me. We bonded over shared complaints about early classes and love for coffee. As the lecture began, I couldn't help stealing glances at Stanley. There was something about him that intrigued me, and we quickly became friends, studying together and hanging out on campus. As time passed, I realized I was falling for Stanley. He was kind, funny, and always there for me. Looking back, that first day in the lecture hall was just the beginning of our journey together. And I'm grateful for the chance encounter that brought him into my life. I will never regret meeting Stanley. He is always going to hold a special place in my heart as he gave me some of the happiest memories of my life. I cursed everything, and I blame myself solely for it. If not for the fact that I had cheated on him, he would have never cheated on me with our neighbor. In the blink of an eye, Stanley and I went from dating to practically living together. Stanley was from a wealthy family, and he spoiled me rotten. He handled the bills and treated me like a queen, even before we tied the knot. Then, out of the blue, Stanley proposed, and our wedding was straight out of a storybook fancy venue, flowers everywhere, the whole 9 yards. His parents insisted on a prenup. They liked me, and they were very friendly to me, but they were adamant on me signing a prenup. I didn't think much of it back then, but looking back, that prenup was like a secret safety net for Stanley. Who knew a piece of paper could be such a game changer? As the years rolled by after we tied the knot, Stanley's dad retired, passing the role of CEO to Stanley. Suddenly, Stanley's schedule was jam-packed, like he had a dozen plates spinning at once. He was constantly on the move, jetting off to meetings, conferences, and sales pitches faster than you could say busy bee. At first, I didn't mind. It meant I could be a stay-at-home wife without a care in the world. Stanley took care of everything, making sure money was never an issue. I never punched a time clock and had never worked since the day I tossed my graduation cap. But as time passed, that big, empty house started feeling less like home and more like a deserted island. Loneliness crept in like an unwanted guest, reminding me that no amount of cash could fill the void of companionship. I started missing Stanley more and more. I knew I should have talked to him about it, but I kept it all bottled up inside. After all, he was busting his butt to provide for us. Complaining would have felt ungrateful, so I kept quiet. One day, I headed to the grocery store just a few blocks away. I didn't bother taking the car since I only needed a few things. While browsing the sweets aisle, I've got a bit of a sweet tooth, especially for chocolate, I literally bumped into the most handsome guy I'd ever seen. Now, let me tell you, my husband Stanley is a total heartthrob. But this guy was something else too. He kindly helped me reach for an item on the shelf and struck up a conversation. Jeremy, that was his name, was incredibly friendly and easy to talk to. I found myself enjoying the attention, soaking up every moment of our chat. He lived nearby, though not in our immediate neighborhood. At some point, it hit me like a ton of bricks that I was married, and what I was doing felt all kinds of wrong. I made up an excuse to leave, but Jeremy insisted on dropping me home. Jeremy insisted on accompanying me home, and when we reached the checkout counter, he insisted on paying for my groceries. I couldn't help but blush at his gesture. It was flattering to feel noticed and appreciated, especially after almost 5 years of marriage. I knew I wasn't wearing my wedding ring, so Jeremy probably didn't realize I was married. Feeling conflicted, I knew I should tell Jeremy about my marital status, but the words stuck in my throat. Maybe I was overthinking things. Perhaps Jeremy was just being friendly, and mentioning my marriage would only make things awkward. So I decided to go with the flow and let the moment unfold naturally. Jeremy dropped me off at home, and as we said our goodbyes, Jeremy asked for my number. And without thinking, I gave it to him. Deep down, I knew it was a mistake, but in that moment, I couldn't bring myself to refuse him. Jeremy even complimented the house. I felt a pang of guilt and quickly deflected, telling him that my parents were wealthy, which is why I could afford such a nice place. He seemed to buy it and even joked about me being a trust fund kid. Little did he know, the house actually belonged to my husband. Jeremy drove away, leaving me standing at the gate of my house. I couldn't help but feel a surge of happiness tinged with guilt. It had been a long time since I connected with someone outside of my marriage, and Jeremy's attention had filled a void I hadn't realized was there. Loneliness had become my constant companion, a shadow that followed me wherever I went. But for a brief moment, talking to Jeremy made me forget about that emptiness. Yet, deep down, I knew that what I was doing was wrong. I was treading dangerous territory, teetering on the edge of crossing boundaries that should never be crossed. I knew I was playing with fire, but in that moment I didn't care. The rush of excitement and validation that Jeremy's attention brought me was intoxicating, drowning out the voice of reason in my head. I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt gnawing at my conscience, but I pushed it aside, burying it beneath layers of denial. It was easier to blame my husband for my indiscretions, to shift the responsibility onto his shoulders. If he wasn't always traveling, leaving me alone for weeks on end, then perhaps I wouldn't have given Jeremy my number. It was a convenient excuse, a way to absolve myself of any wrongdoing. But deep down, I knew the truth. My actions were my own, and no amount of rationalization could change that fact. I was walking a dangerous path, and I feared where it might lead me. Yet, in that moment, I was willing to ignore the warning signs, to chase after the fleeting thrill of attention and validation. Little did I know it was a path that would lead to consequences far greater than I could have ever imagined. Jeremy and I hit it off right from the start. We could talk for hours without even realizing how much time had passed. We found out we had a ton in common, so conversations flowed like a breeze. Jeremy's funny and charming, and he had me laughing all the time. I knew I was getting in deep with Jeremy, but I couldn't help myself. Our talks felt like a breath of fresh air in my lonely life. It was like I was in too deep to even try to back out. Despite knowing it was risky, I kept diving headfirst into our friendship, unable to resist the pull of his company. As time went on, Jeremy started coming over to the house when my husband was away. It started innocently enough, with him dropping by for a chat or to help out with something around the house. But as our friendship deepened, so did his visits. It became a regular occurrence, his presence filling the empty spaces left by my husband's absence. Keeping up the facade became increasingly challenging. I had to hide any trace of my marriage whenever Jeremy came over. To him, I was a single woman with wealthy parents, living alone in a nice house. In reality, I was a married woman, and my husband's presence loomed large even in his absence. I found myself constantly tidying up, hiding wedding photos and mementos, and erasing any evidence of my husband's existence before Jeremy arrived. It felt like living a double life. Hiding everything away became a routine, albeit a challenging one. I did my best to conceal any signs of my marriage from Jeremy's prying eyes. But one fateful night, as we settled in for a movie marathon, I found myself crossing a line I had sworn never to cross. It started innocently enough, with us cuddling on the couch during Netflix and chill. But as the night wore on and the movie's glow filled the room, things took a turn. Before I knew it, we were tangled up in each other's arms, our kisses growing more passionate and desperate with each passing moment. In a desperate bid to conceal the truth, I led Jeremy to the guest bedroom, pretending it was my own. It was the only way to keep the illusion intact, to avoid the inevitable questions and suspicions that would arise if he saw traces of my husband in our matrimonial bedroom. So I would take some stuff from our matrimonial bedroom and put them in the guest bedroom and pretend as if the guest bedroom was my room. So I led Jeremy to the guest bedroom and we had sex. The morning after was like waking up from a nightmare. I couldn't believe what I'd done. Cheating on my husband felt like a punch to the gut. I wanted to kick Jeremy out, to come clean, but I was paralyzed with fear. Then Jeremy walked in with breakfast in hand. The sight of him, so caring and attentive, made my heart ache with conflicting emotions. I wanted to kick him out, to confess everything and face the consequences. But as he set the tray down beside me, his eyes full of warmth and affection, I knew I couldn't bring myself to do it. Jeremy's gestures were so romantic, so genuine, that the words stuck in my throat. How could I shatter the illusion of perfection he saw in me? How could I tell him the truth, knowing it would destroy everything we had? So I pushed the guilt aside, buried it beneath layers of denial, and allowed myself to pretend as if everything was all right. Looking back, I can't believe how I convinced myself that what I was doing was okay. I mean, deep down, I knew it was wrong, but I somehow managed to gaslight myself into thinking I could get away with it. Looking back now, it's clear as day that was a big lie I was telling myself. But back then, I guess I was just naive. Jeremy and I kept up our secret rendezvous whenever my husband was away. It became routine. Either he'd come over or I'd sneak off to his place. We were like any other dating couple, except for the fact that I was hiding a huge secret. I was married. It felt like living a double life, and the guilt gnawed at me constantly, but I was too deep in to turn back. As time passed, the divide between my husband and me became more pronounced. He started to notice the growing distance between us, the subtle shifts in our dynamic that I had tried so hard to conceal. Despite his efforts to bridge the gap, to overcompensate for what was missing, I couldn't shake the feeling of being emotionally disconnected from him. At first, I brushed off his attempts, telling myself that it was just a phase, a rough patch we needed to work through. But deep down, I knew the truth. The truth that our relationship had been slowly unraveling long before Jeremy entered the picture. His presence only served to highlight the cracks in our marriage, the flaws and shortcomings that I had been trying to ignore for so long. As my husband's efforts to reconnect grew more desperate, I found myself retreating further into myself, building walls to keep him out. It wasn't intentional, but the more I tried to distance myself from Jeremy, the more I pushed my husband away in the process. It was a vicious cycle, one that I felt powerless to break free from. Despite my best efforts to maintain the facade of a happy marriage, the truth was impossible to ignore. The gap between us had grown too wide, and no amount of overcompensation could bridge the divide. And as I watched my husband struggle to hold on to something that was slipping through his fingers, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt for the role I played in pushing him away. The weight of guilt pressed down on me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't escape the overwhelming feeling that everything was my fault, that I had single-handedly driven a wedge between my husband and me. But deep down, I knew I hadn't set out to intentionally sabotage my marriage. As my relationship with Jeremy continued, he too began to notice the cracks in our facade. He picked up on the fact that I never posted about him on social media, and I always seemed hesitant to go out in public with him. I tried to brush it off, blaming my behavior on being introverted, but even I knew that excuse could only hold out for so long. The truth was, I was scared. Scared of what people would think if they found out about us. Scared of the consequences of my actions. Scared of facing the reality of what I had done. So, I kept Jeremy at arm's length, hoping to shield him from the fallout of my mistakes. But in doing so, I only succeeded in pushing him further away, driving yet another wedge between us. My husband began to spend more time at home, and I felt the rift between Jeremy and me widening. With my husband's increased presence, it became impossible for Jeremy to come over, and I couldn't sneak off to see him like before. He grew frustrated, sensing that something was off, and pressed me for answers. Desperate to keep up the facade, I spun lie after lie, telling Jeremy that my parents were around and they didn't know about our relationship yet. I claimed they wouldn't approve, using them as a shield to deflect his questions. But even I knew that excuse had a shelf life. You can only use the same lie so many times before it starts to unravel. The atmosphere at home got tense. My husband could sense something was off, and it put a strain on our relationship. Meanwhile, Jeremy was getting frustrated with my excuses and evasions. He couldn't understand why I was pulling away from him. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, trying to keep everyone happy while hiding the truth. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. It was the classic move that my husband used in catching me. My husband checked my phone. I had grown complacent, not just in my marriage, but also in my affair with Jeremy. I didn't even bother deleting our conversations, and that's how my husband discovered the truth. He went through my phone while I was asleep, taking pictures of our conversations and sending them to himself. But he never said a word to me about it. Instead, he started acting strangely cheerful and began spending even more time at home. It was like he was setting a trap, waiting for me to fall into it. He started encouraging me to go out more, which only added to my suspicion that he knew about Jeremy. But I played along, pretending like everything was normal, all the while feeling like I was walking on thin ice. I convinced myself that my husband was clueless about my affair. After all, he was the type to confront issues head-on rather than beat around the bush, a trait I admired about him. I figured if he knew, he'd address it directly. But boy, was I wrong. I started going out more, telling my husband I was hanging with friends, even though I didn't have many. Instead, I was spending all my time with Jeremy. We grew close again, and I apologized for my absence, blaming it on my strict parents and an overbearing brother who wouldn't approve of him. Jeremy, being the sweetheart he was, accepted my excuses and suggested we hang out at his place instead. This routine went on for a week or two. I'd visit Jeremy's place a few times a week, slipping further into the web of deceit I'd spun. But one day, as I returned home, I noticed my husband's car in the driveway, yet he wasn't inside. Curious, I looked over to our neighbor's house, only to see my husband stepping out. That's when I knew my charade was over, and I had fucked up. The sight of my husband emerging from our neighbor's house, wearing a smirk on his face, sent a chill down my spine. Our neighborhood was known for its exclusivity and affluent residents, where everyone kept to themselves, too posh or rich to bother with neighborly interactions. It was a place where gossip rarely spread beyond closed doors. Given the lack of any apparent connection between my husband and our neighbor, the scene seemed suspicious. They had never exchanged more than a passing greeting, and there was no reason for my husband to be visiting her house. Yet there he was, with that telltale smirk plastered on his face. In that moment, my gut instinct kicked in, and I knew something was amiss. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing the truth I had been desperately trying to ignore. My husband's behavior betrayed him, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something from me. Without hesitation, I marched up to my husband to confront him. I demanded to know why he was leaving our neighbor's house, but he just smirked and stayed silent. He tried to brush past me, but I stood my ground, blocking his path and pressing him for answers. Finally, he met my gaze and calmly confessed that he had been at our neighbor's house to do the same things I did at Jeremy's house. I was stunned into silence. Panic flooded my mind as realization dawned on me. My husband knew about Jeremy. Every thought screamed in my head. My husband knows about Jeremy. My husband knows about Jeremy. I felt a sinking sensation in the pit of my stomach. I was in deep trouble. My husband remained eerily calm, dropping the bombshell that he had been aware of my affair for some time. With a composed demeanor, he brushed past me and entered the house, leaving me standing there in shock. Feeling completely screwed, I knew I had to confront my husband. So I followed him back inside and found him in the study. With tears welling up, I asked him how long he'd been seeing the neighbor. His response hit me hard. He admitted they'd been together as long as I'd been with Jeremy. It was like a punch in the gut. I then pressed him on how long he'd known about my affair. He dodged the question, but made it clear he had solid evidence of my cheating. My husband stared at me dead on, his tone serious. He said he wasn't going to waste time crying or yelling over my cheating. He'd already made up his mind that I wasn't worth it. He dropped the bomb. We were getting divorced, and I had 10 minutes to grab my stuff and get out. As I cried, hoping for some empathy, he stayed stone-faced. He warned me that if I didn't hurry, I'd be leaving with nothing but the clothes on my back. I made the decision to leave without a fuss. I didn't want any drama with my husband or the neighbors. Even though it was a quiet area, I knew things could get messy if security had to intervene. So I gathered my belongings and packed them up. My husband reminded me that the car was his, so I couldn't take it. I didn't argue. Instead, I ordered an Uber. With nowhere else to go, I realized I still had Jeremy as my backup plan. I leaned on Jeremy, knowing he'd offer me refuge. I concocted a lie about a heated argument with my parents and elder brother, claiming they'd kicked me out of the house they bought for me. It was a fabricated story, but I needed Jeremy to take me in. With no job and no savings, I was completely reliant on someone else's support to get back on my feet. As a stay-at-home wife who hadn't worked since college, I had no other options. In a cruel twist of fate, I soon found out my husband had beaten me to the punch. Before I even reached Jeremy's doorstep, my phone started ringing incessantly. It was Jeremy, and he knew everything. My husband had reached out to him and spilled the beans. Jeremy was devastated. He felt betrayed and hurt that I had lied to him throughout our entire relationship. He made it clear he never wanted to see me again. Feeling utterly rejected and with nowhere else to turn, I instructed the Uber to take me to the nearest cheap motel. It was a humiliating blow, realizing I had nowhere to go and no one left to turn to. As if things couldn't get any worse, I arrived at the motel, paid the Uber fare, and checked in. But when I decided to check our joint bank account, well, his money technically, I was in for another shock. My husband had drained about 95% of the funds. Sure, it was his money, but considering he knew I was now homeless, leaving me with only a fraction of what was left felt like a cruel blow. It was barely enough to cover expenses for a month, leaving me in a precarious financial situation with no safety net to fall back on. To add insult to injury, my husband decided to go for the jugular and share screenshots of my conversations with Jeremy with everyone we knew. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone. My parents, my siblings, his siblings, our friends. The whole 9 yards. But in a twisted turn of events, I guess I should thank him. After my parents got wind of the mess I'd made, they were furious. I had shattered my marriage and brought shame upon our family. Despite their anger, though, they couldn't turn their backs on me. So, begrudgingly, they scraped together enough money to buy me a plane ticket back home. It's been about 2 weeks since everything fell apart, and my life is still far from normal. I've accepted the harsh reality that my husband won't ever take me back. I've come to terms with that. Jeremy has cut me off completely, blocking me on every social media platform. Now I find myself holed up with my parents in another state. My husband wasn't too pleased about me leaving town before our divorce was finalized, but honestly, I couldn't care less. He doesn't get to dictate my every move anymore. If it weren't for my parents taking me in, I'd be out on the streets. Speaking of my husband, he's made it clear he'll be sending divorce papers my way soon. It stings, but I can't say I didn't see it coming. Especially after he cleaned out almost all the money from our joint account. Money he earned, so I guess the money is his. He may have thought he had control over me, but he doesn't get to call the shots anymore. To top it all off, I've heard rumors that my husband is still seeing our neighbor. It's like a slap in the face knowing they're probably together now. Well, I say, screw them both. Honestly, living a double life might sound exciting, but it's a recipe for disaster. It's like walking a tightrope, always on the edge of things falling apart. Each lie piles up, burying the truth deeper and deeper. Looking back, it's clear where things went wrong. If only there had been honesty instead of sneaking around, maybe things would have turned out differently. But looking back just brings regrets, without changing a thing. So, to anyone tempted to lead a double life, think twice. The excitement isn't worth the pain it brings. Choose honesty, even when it's hard, and build relationships on trust and truth. It might not always be easy, but it's the only way to find real peace and happiness. And if you ever have any doubts and feel like cheating, just take a look at me. I would still be back at my husband's 7-bedroom house with a home theater and a pool if only I hadn't tried to live a double life.